and leave this off, that, stick around with us here on video. Be nice. So, okay. Cool. Are we back?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, we are back live streaming. So we'll go ahead and get started. Can folks see my screen? Looks like yes. Thumbs up.
Yes.
Great. See, thumbs ups are helpful with the camera. Welcome, everyone. We are at our June Equity Advisory Group meeting. It is becoming a wonderful spring evening, and happy to have you all back. As always, we'll kick off with a safety moment, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Shakisha to get us started.
Do we have Shakisha with us? And
I don't see Shakisha.
okay. Well, Shakisha isn't with us. Do you want to try to cover her safety moment? Or I can. So extension cord safety is what our safety moment is supposed to be today. We all use them. If you're blowing up that bouncy house in your front yard this summer, but make sure that you inspect those cords before use. And here's Shakisha. I'm sure we can tag team this. Try to keep those electric cords away from water. Plug them into a socket fully, and don't use any loose sockets or cords. Shakisha, I was just standing in for you for a second. Are you back with us? We can tag team this. Try to keep those electric cords away from water. Plug them into a socket fully, and don't use any loose sockets or cords. Shakisha, I was just standing in for you for a second. Are you back with us?
Yeah, I am.
We can tag team this. Those electric cords away from. Oh, great! I don't know where my voice is coming from now. To socket fully, and don't use any loose sockets or cords. Shakisha, I was just standing in for you for a second.
Let me see. Shakisha, can you hear us here?
I can hear you. My team.
Yeah, but it sounds like we've got an echo from
I don't know where my voice is coming from now.
Ariam that's.
I think someone is watching.
Yeah, it's not me.
Is anyone watching the live stream?
Let me see. Shakisha, can you hear us here?
Yeah, but it sounds like we've got an echo from.
I'm going to mute Shakisha. Shakisha, I'm muting. Sorry, I'm going ahead and mute your audio. It looks like either through the Teams back channel or through the YouTube live stream, the audio is coming through two places. And so this is true for anyone. If you are in this meeting, if you can have any background audio minimized, especially if you're listening to this same meeting, because then we get to hear ourselves twice, which is fun, but also is probably going to make it difficult to do this. So I don't know, Shakisha, if you're trying to figure that out. But yeah, okay, doing the best we have.
I can keep going. So we've got storing cords in a dry area, and then making sure that you have the appropriate cord for the right job. You may know you probably don't want to use that extension cord to plug in your car, your EV vehicle, making sure that you have the right voltage of things, and following whatever directions that you have with your appliance. So I think that kind of covers it.
Thank you, Ariam. Yeah, we've got technical issues. Same umbrella. Oh, there's Dennis. Okay. I'll just keep talking here as Dennis gets settled in. We've got a lot of things. They're all under the same umbrella of the Distributed Energy Resources, the DER Empowerment Pilot update several months ago. Folks came from that process to share a little bit of an update around sort of that work in progress. Today, you're going to hear more around that, more around sort of the learnings that PSC is really internalizing out of that pilot and what it's prompting folks to consider now. Welcome back, Dennis. We're gonna go to you here in a second as we had a little bit of a tech issue, so we won't skip over you, but I'm reading through the agenda and then we'll prompt you back here in a second. Then we'll have a little bit of a break. We'll roll into talking about some feedback on the language access plan. Same thing, similarly, where we are in the process, and more importantly, what is the understanding from PSE around the need and how can folks on this group leverage their lived experience, their connections to communities to support best practices around language access. And then finally, we'll spend a little bit of time hearing about updates from the solar grant. And I know that folks always tend to have a lot of motivation and energy around the solar grant process. And I know we've got Mackenzie on the call today to talk through that. So that is our plan for this evening. And because we lost a little bit of time, I will be doing my best throughout the meeting to make sure that we're sort of focused and trying to get to everything that we can. But I do not want to Miss Dennis, your opportunity for the equity moment that you prepared for the group. So I've got your slide here when you're yeah, you're right, Dennis. And actually, this is actually a great setup for not just today, but actually where we've been, a lot of the equity advisory group's progress in sort of becoming, not becoming, I should say, but adding some more sort of robust picture and rigor around what's important in the conversations around advancing equity, in this case, restorative equity. And that last piece there about advocate is something that is becoming increasingly important for the group and how that looks. So I appreciate you teeing us up with that. As we move in and on, again, remember, have sort of respect and consideration for team members, or sorry, AG members on the team. We want to make sure that we're doing what we can to have productive, constructive conversations. And so again, as facilitators, in this case, again, I'm mindful of timing here, just in the sort of our tech snafu there at the top. So we'll try and figure out the appropriate places to move faster, stay slower as needed. And again, encourage folks to come out into the conversation as much as possible, off camera, off mute, wherever possible will be appreciated. And then for folks observing, we will do our best to sort of check towards a public comment period by around 6:55 at a break. And then also just before that period, we'll have instructions on how to join the meeting if you wish to provide public comment. So without further ado, again, teed up a little bit, y'all heard a little bit about the Distributed Energy Resources Empowerment Pilot from Ray and Co. a couple of meetings ago, and very excited for y'all to hear a little bit about that progress and have you all share in some of the reflections as, again, as Dennis kind of just pointed out, sort of this bigger picture of advancing and supporting equity across the utility. So Ray, I will toggle your slides as you let me indicate to me.
Thanks, Ishmael. Audio is good? Yes. Okay, awesome. Great to see you all again. Thanks for being here. When we talked about this back in January, we were about midway through the empowerment pilot. And we're back to tell you how we've concluded it, although conclusion is probably not the right word to use, but the pilot part of this is wrapped up for us for the most part. Before we jump to the next slide, though, I wanted to note some folks that are with me tonight. So we had a great team help us deliver this pilot. You'll hear mostly from me tonight, but Virginia Winslow is a PSE employee on our clean energy team. She's here with us. And then Bridget Mullins and Will, who you know Will well, most of you who have been on the AG for a while. Both of them played a huge role in making this pilot work over the last almost year since we really started the engagement directly. Next slide, Ishmael. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're essentially towards the end of the pilot itself. Tonight, we want to talk to you about what we did, what we learned, where we're headed. And when we get to the end of the slides, we have some proposed guiding principles that we'll talk about that we'd love to hear your thoughts on, your reflections, as we try to form those into more meaningful and tangible guidelines that we can share more broadly at PSE. Next slide, please. Okay, so you might remember this, but I'm going to go through a little bit of background just to remind everyone what we did. We had a condition that said we needed to engage at the empowerment level of the IAP2 spectrum. We'll talk about that on a slide in just a moment. In doing so, we decided to form what felt like focus groups in concept, but very different in practice. And we did that by looking around our service territory. Where did we have some strong relationships with CBOs that we thought could help us leverage bringing people together? We also overlaid that with the work that you all did around deepest need, gosh, almost 2 years ago, to make sure that we were going to places that really we had a strong chance of engaging directly with customers in named communities, and more particularly those customers that met that deepest need definition. So where we ended up was up in Skagit County. We had a collection of Spanish-speaking, primarily agriculture workers in that community that one of our community outreach specialists, his name is Juan, helped us pull together along with communities and schools. He has a great relationship up there. Those meetings were facilitated entirely in Spanish from the beginning to the end. Only at the very last meeting did I ever say a word. I went to every meeting, but that was the only meeting where I said 5 sentences and they translated for me. But other than that, every ounce of it was in Spanish. It was really cool experience. And a really, really active and engaged group. They brought their kids and we had a great meal every time. And it was, honestly, it was a lot of fun. We also went out to Bremerton. Bremerton was actually our first group. We engaged with NAACP. The president out there had supported us on, or wanted to be involved with equity forums, and we reached out and he helped us set up a group out there. We then expanded that to incorporate the YWCA and some individuals in their organization or related to their organization. Those started out in person, but then we had some folks, as the weather changed, weren't as comfortable driving at night. It's pretty rural, pretty windy, lots of trees out there. So they asked us to do hybrid meetings. So we ended up maybe 60-40, 50-50 kind of split between in-person and hybrid at each of those meetings. We then were able to leverage some work that our CCEAP team was doing. They were forming an advisory group. They had recruited something like 50 individuals for a small advisory group. So we borrowed from their pool of candidates and formed a group in Kent. This group elected to meet entirely virtually. Started off a little bit slower. I think the virtual piece of that made it a little more challenging to build some trust and relationship. But once we got going, this was a really powerful group that had a lot to say about language access in particular. And the last group, the Suquamish tribe, we reached out to a number of tribes. And I should say, as we were doing this, as we were sending out invites, we were very careful. So normally you do a survey, you do a focus group, you might really advertise broadly and just see who shows up, right? In this case, we wanted to be very careful that we didn't say no to anyone. So I didn't want to reach out to all 17 tribes in our service territory, for example, on day one, then 7 of them say yes, and we don't have the resources to meet their needs, right? So these were all kind of step by step, so it took longer to build these groups. So Suquamish, they invited us to their climate, Virginia might have told me, the climate resilience team, excuse me. They helped us form this group, and this group from day one said, hey, we want to do this. This is fascinating, but we want you to go slow. And it might not go to the same place these other groups are going. And that was our first hint that this might not go exactly as we planned, which was totally fine because we planned for it to not go exactly as we planned. And I'll explain that a little bit later. So those are our 4 groups. We met with them about 8 times each over the course of roughly 6 months. And that's what's brought us to today. Next slide, Ishmael. And I'm watching the chat, but please do let me know if there's any questions. All right, so what you see on this slide, part 1, part 2, part 3, and then the circles directly underneath that in a line. That was our initial plan, that we would have info sessions, we would recruit a group of people, we would educate them about what DERs are, distributed energy resources. This is all encompassing DERs, so energy efficiency, batteries, solar, demand response, anything really the customer can do on their side of the meter. Then our plan was to identify challenges, talk about programs that they might be interested in, and ultimately drive to designing a program that the groups could be empowered to maybe select from 2 or 3. This is the program we want you to pursue through regulatory process. Well, about the time we were meeting with all of you, we were at that meeting 3 phase, and we were hearing from these groups, and we talked about this a little bit in our last meeting, that they wanted something different. They weren't really keen on let's build a new program. A lot of the feedback we got is you've got a lot of programs, something like 120 of them. And what we heard from them is it's not so much about the programs you offer, although that is important, don't get me wrong. It's more about how are we learning about them? How are they designed to meet our specific needs? Can we find them on the website? Can we sign up for them easily and quickly, et cetera? So we made a pretty sharp right turn and started focusing on how do we center outreach and accessibility in our program design and our not just DERs really. They spoke to us a lot about things like language access or bill assistance, tax exemption for tribes, which we'll talk about in a bit. And so with each group, we started to head to slightly different places, although there was certainly overlap. Each group had their own kind of interests and hopes and dreams. So each group went to a different place, and that was really exciting and fun. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of these, it's totally okay if you say, duh, Ray, you should know that. Some of these, I might not need to put on a slide, but I feel like I do because I think all of these were reinforced, if not clearly stated in the meeting. So emergent design is empowering and mandatory. What do I mean by that? So emergent design is not just that concept that we made that hard right turn, which was definitely emergent, but it was also how do we adjust our facilitation techniques? How do we adjust our approach in real time before a meeting, in collaboration with those customers, really in empowerment with those customers to let them tell us where they wanted to go next. That was huge in, I think, building trust and building partnership in these communities where we were trying to work. Meet them where they are is a mindset. So I want to credit C many months, probably more than a year ago, started my mind to this place. And I think it was just reinforced by these empowerment groups. I think in my past work, you often think about meet them. I often thought meet them where they are is going to a meeting where a group might be convening, right? So I go to the YWCA when they're having a group meeting and talk to customers in that space. I think that's absolutely true. But what we tried to do was meet our participants where they are in a multitude of different ways. So in Skagit, we met them in Spanish, right? Probably the most important thing we could have done. We also had local food catered in each of those spaces, right? And they told us where they wanted the meal from, and it was a meal, not just snacks. And we met them where they are in terms of what they understand about the clean energy transformation, in terms of what they understand about PSE and customer programs. We spent time talking about, we had one of the customers say, why would you want me to save money? You're a commercial entity that makes money off of me buying electricity from you. I don't really know why I should do energy efficiency programs or demand response. It sort of feels counterintuitive. So we spent time in that space, just as an example. I know I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to keep going. Trust is foundational and earned, not granted. This was different in each space. Some spaces, I think, granted us trust more quickly. But it became increasingly clear that we were building trust by being responsive, by being transparent, by being emergent in our thinking about how we were doing this work. And I can say confidently that we all left those meetings feeling like a tremendous amount of trust with those customers and the people close to them was built. It felt really good in the moment and something we want to hold on to and try to build from here. And then capacity building is empowerment that goes far beyond this pilot. So one of our other colleagues, Kim, works with Bridget and Will over on the Mall Foster Triangle team. She coined this phrase, capacity building is empowerment, about halfway through the process. And it stuck with me throughout this time. We heard lots of individuals in these groups talk about the concept of capacity building, even if they didn't use that terminology. because what we were doing is empowering them to have more control in their energy bill, in the way they access energy, the way they use, etc. And that went, again, a long way towards leaning into all of these learnings. Next slide, please. Okay. So I told you that all the groups went to similar but different places. Where we ended up with is 14 concepts, we call them. On the left-hand side are what came from the 3 non-tribal groups, and on the right-hand side were what came from the Suquamish tribe. I won't go through these in great detail because we could spend all night just talking about them, but what we heard from customers is we need people in our community, in our communities, that understand us and understand our needs. So that's the community energy ambassador concept. That varies from place to place. On the right, the tribal energy and program advisor has a very interesting parallel with the community energy ambassadors. Not exactly the same thing, but the idea is someone local, someone I know, someone I trust that can help me navigate these. Program enrollment workshops. We heard about these quite often. We actually did one up in Skagit as part of the pilot program to help folks enroll in bill discount rate program, in our flex or demand response programs, and other programs that help people reduce their bills primarily. Those are something that our outreach team does regularly. We often call them pop-ups, and our and ongoing. You see the community pop-up event on the Suquamish tribe side of the ledger there. Very similar concepts. Youth energy education. We actually have a program through CCAP now. I think it's going through next year, that is sponsoring internships for youth in clean energy, and then also developing a partnership between that program and programs within PSE, the apprenticeship programs to help people grow into roles at PSE. We heard people like the empowerment groups, if not love them, and they want us to do more of them. They want to continue the groups. Juan, for example, has worked to continue the Skagit group. Even though the pilot has ended, he's trying to keep that group together. Every time we met, they would bring new people into the space. And so he's working to keep that together, and we're working to figure out how do we model this long term? What does it look like? How is it scalable? Language access plan. I want to be fully transparent. No one in any of our groups said you should do a language access plan, but they did tell us you should make everything more accessible in language. And so we got some specific feedback about that, and we are going to work to engage 1 or 2 of our empowerment groups, even though they've sort of sunset, as you'll hear later when we talk about the language access plan. We're going to try to leverage 1 or 2 of those groups in that work. Program enrollment, education simplification, and the program navigation filter, 2 parallel concepts. Both of them, can you just make it simpler for me as a customer to find what I'm looking for? The idea being, can I go in and say I'm a single parent who lives in a rental or lives in a mobile home? Which of these programs would apply to me? Because obviously not all 120 of them do. And we've got a team of folks on our customer experience side working on that. Expand and enhance programs for housing providers and renters. I'm not sure if Mackenzie's talked about this yet, but we have recently rolled out new programs that do exactly just that. So multi-tenant solar, and I think it's a multi-tenant battery concept too, but I won't oversell that point. But we are definitely thinking about that and working on it. People loved income eligible community solar. That's a program that has been around for quite some time and continues to be around. We just recently opened up a new community solar facility with additional income eligible shares. They go quick. And lastly, battery microgrids. This one came up more on the peninsula, the across the water side of our service territory, where it is much more rural, many more trees, where they experience power outages due to weather fairly often. The concept here is that instead of, or in partnership with improving transmission lines and electricity delivery, we can also set up microgrids that essentially create an electric island. So if a transmission line or distribution line goes down, that community would still have access to power. On the right side, I talked about the first two, the tribal liaison. Again, that's about local people who understand me, what my needs are. We saw really clearly that the needs of our customers in, at least in the Squamish tribe, are quite different from the needs of our other customers. And then the last one, utility tax exemption. So tribal members who live on tribal land in the state of Washington are exempt from not just our utility tax, but most taxes. And so PSC had a process set up for that. But it was, just a few words on a web page. We built out a fact sheet, and we have helped dozens of people get signed up for that tax exemption. And that particular one has already been rolled out to multiple other tribes as we try to expand and make sure that resource is available. It's not a huge dollar amount for a lot of us, but it is a really meaningful effort to make sure folks understand that we are honoring their rights as tribal members in the state of Washington. Okay, I keep going. I don't see any questions. So we got through all those programs, and we said, what are we going to do with all these things? Lots of great ideas. So we asked each group to review the concepts. Again, not every group had the same concepts, right? So we asked them to take a look at not just their own, but everything that's been developed. And not really rank them, but tell us which ones you like. We gave them unlimited dots, right? We didn't want this perception of scarcity of resources. So they got lots of dots and they lots of Post-it notes, and they told us which ones they liked, which ones they didn't like, etc. Actually, the part they didn't like was very, very limited. There were a couple of cases where one group might say, I don't know too much about this, I want to learn more, but there weren't any of them that they wanted to take off the list. So we're sitting with those 14 concepts. And the question I have is, where are we going from here? That third bullet. We're studying each of them. My team is reaching out to half a dozen or more teams across PSE to find out, what are we working on today? I've already mentioned some of that as I was going through the concepts. Which ones can we move forward? Which ones need to go into our plan for the next rate case or the 2027 integrated system plan? So you may see versions of these concepts come up over time in any of those proceedings. You will probably see a lot of these come back to you too as an EAG to talk about, how do we go from a concept to a fully functioning program or service, etc. And then in terms of the empowerment groups themselves, we're committed to coming back to them, providing them updates. We were very clear throughout the process that we didn't expect any single program to just, snap our fingers and it would be there. They understand there's a regulatory process for some of these, and that it will take time. So we have them in most cases email, text message. In the case of Skagit and maybe others, we'll try to continue them. We're still working through that, but we are committed to staying with them and continuing to circle back. Next slide, please. Okay, I think I just have a couple more. I wanted to circle back to, what did we really hear from these folks though? We got all these ideas, but there were some, I would say, prevailing themes. The first one, and I would say first by a mile, is they want help saving money on their bills. We heard that repeatedly from every single group. Demographics really didn't matter in that case. So we did focus a lot on our bill discount rate program, on other discount programs, the tribal tax exemption, and also on energy efficiency, demand response type programs that either offer incentives or can help people lower their bills. The second one, make programs more accessible with a focus on cost and energy savings. Again, these are all related, right? People want to know how to find these programs, and they want to know how to find them without knowing they need to look for them. Because I think that was a challenge in and of itself, as people didn't know what to look for. And so then therefore, how are they going to find it? And lastly, they asked us to expand our existing community engagement efforts. focused on building trust and relationships. And this pilot is time consuming, and you can't reach hundreds of thousands of customers in this model, but I think it did allow us to build relationships, build trust, build community, so we could have really rich and thoughtful conversations, and folks could leave with meaningful outcomes. Okay, my last slide, I believe, and this is where we wanted to ask you to reflect, although please feel free to ask questions about the other slides. So I'm going to credit Will and Bridget and the consultant team for these, because as they were writing up our lessons learned from the facilitation efforts, they coined these themes, if you will, or headlines. And I'll go through them quickly. I think we're doing okay on time, Ishmael?
Yeah. Let's
Okay.
keep going.
Awesome. So first, assume communities already have power. These are all, I was going to say this is important. These are all important, so I'll stop there. What we want to do here is recognize that we went into this space not with the intent of, hey, we have some power, we're going to give it to you. We went into the space, we want to be in this space, recognize that people already have power, they already have choices. We were there to recognize it, to support it, and really to work in service of their specific needs. Honor a relationship is strategy. I think Bridget used the phrase, relationships are infrastructure, and they really are. We could see through each of these groups as the relationships got stronger, as we heard in meeting X about the tax exemption challenge, and we came back the next meeting with a fact sheet and with the process for how to get people tax exempt. Or a gentleman said, I can't come to the next couple of meetings because I don't drive at night and it gets dark at 4:30 now. And so Will made sure he had an Uber to pick him up and take him home. As we did those things, we saw people, their trust in us changed. And it wasn't instantly, it was over time, right? But they're building blocks. And those relationships really helped cement our strategy going forward. Embrace differences. There is no one right way. Bridget, I'm going to quote you again. Diversity is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition for us to design with. We had 4 very different groups, very different lived experiences, very powerful stories to tell. And yet there were a lot of similarities across them. And my instinct as a process person was to start by doing everything the same way, and try to get us to a similar outcome. We ended up doing things very different ways, and we got to a similar outcome. And I think that was a really powerful piece of this. Design for emergence, not control. We shouldn't be able to predict the outcome and work like this. It's probably not empowerment if we already know what's going to happen before we do the work. Excuse me. Prioritize lived experiences. I think this one speaks for itself, but I cannot overstate the power in those rooms of hearing people's stories. Particularly in the last meeting, we all sat in circles, and everyone went around the room and talked about what this experience was like for them, and for each of them, as they described this experience, they talked about it in the context of their own daily lives, and how it was similar to or different or affected their daily lives. That was a really powerful experience, and I think we learned a lot from each of those sessions. Facilitate transformational and not transactional engagement. We were not trying to check a box here. Don't get me wrong, we do have a regulatory box to check, but that is, we talked a bit about that on day one, and then we sat it over here and we did the work. And wherever the work took us is where we went. And it was really fun and rewarding to be able to work in that space, and credit to Kara and folks that support me and our team for giving us that flexibility and freedom to do that. And then co-develop new action-oriented approaches to engagement. I think that's what this is all about, right? We had a plan, and as I said early on, you have to have a plan going in, but we were very, very comfortable from day one that the plan we started with might not be the plan we ended up with. We were very transparent of that early on in each of the meetings, and gave folks space to tell us that we needed to plan differently. That we did. We planned with them, alongside them, and not for them. And I think that was really important in getting us to where we are today with these 14 concepts that we can now try to make happen, different paces, different scales, different timelines, but all important in moving this forward. Ishmael, I'm going to pause there and make sure I don't see any
Yeah.
questions, but I think that's the end of my slides, but happy to answer questions.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, Ray. Yeah, I think I think there's a couple of things that I just wanted to acknowledge, and especially as, I don't know, I'm not PSE, I'm not the EAG, but I think somewhere between the two of sharing this sort of reflection as like we were prepping for this meeting and this conversation. And back in January when y'all came to present on the empowerment pilot, I know members of the EAG were really well, this is my observation. Y'all can speak for yourself, but it seemed like members of the EAG are really impressed. And I think that the thing here that is really the opportunity, especially where the EAG is sort of really orienting its like perspective, is that to me, it feels like, and I think you have agreed with this, so I'm curious what folks on the group think, is like, these are principles that, you know, have derived out of a really authentic generative process with particular groups of people, but really can become, you know, a foundation or like a bedrock for engagement across the utility. And so I think that's probably the frame of mind for folks as you're reading these and you're hearing this, is like, you know, again, if you have questions of Ray around the pilot, sure, but you know, take this as like a point to then extend further. And my like you know, foreshadowing here is our next conversation is on language access. And so thinking about these can also help us get into this frame of mind as we have that conversation also. So curious about folks' reactions, you know, thinking about this whole journey really and how these principles help set up PSE for its ongoing journey. And you all really in support of that. How did these resonate? How did these sort of sit with folks? I don't know if Monica or Amy, if you want to add anything. I saw some Terry just say, I love these guiding principles. That's helpful. But I just want to make sure you don't have to jump in if you don't want to. That's also okay. Okay. Yeah, well, thank you. I think I'm curious, Ray, just as you hear members of the group and frankly speaking, I'll call on Ray, but and you know, not to put other PSE members on the spot, but as we go through the rest of our meeting, thinking a little bit about these reflections for yourself as you're sitting, you know, in a moment of like, okay, we're trying to solve for this problem over here. We're trying to figure out, you know, how do we help support customers over here, and recognize the, I guess, the twofold of like, there are at least parts of the utility that have made these relationships that, you know, there's a leverage there that I think is more than, as some people are saying, you know, it's more than like, hey, we have contact information, but actually it's like we've earned trust there, as was described earlier. But then also the reality, or not the reality, but also the opportunity of like, if we look at our picture of what we're dealing with, like this, like what's on the screen, can help us, you know, get deeper, go farther. So I will tee that up for PSE folks as we're talking throughout this meeting. But yeah, Ray and team that worked with this, anything that you all want to sort of say aloud, reflect as we yeah, bring this to a close?
Ishmael, I'll be quick because I know we're already running short on time. Thank you all for your comments, both verbally and in the chat. I'm trying to keep track of both. A couple I wanted to note, Dennis, Thank you for what you said about responsibility. I think our team is very aware of the responsibility. In fact, one of the group leaders in the last meeting looked at us and said, "This was great, but I hope you know that you're leaving here with a lot more responsibility than you came in with." That was really, it was great to hear, a little bit scary too, but yeah, we heard it and we're following suit. Carrie, I think you in the chat said, can this go beyond the pilot? If I got the name wrong, sorry, I'm trying to keep up. That's the intent. We're really thinking about how can we not just share this with teams designing DER programs or bill discount rate programs or building a new project in a community. How can we get them to embrace this and really leverage these guiding principles? So more work to be done there, but absolutely. And then Monica, I think you had the question or the comment about Juan as the gentleman in Skagit. I know Jessica is on the call, she might jump in, but I would say we have Juan in Skagit, but we have people doing the same job that Juan is doing throughout our service territory, both in the residential customer space as well as the small business and tribal space. Not the same thing, small business and tribal space. And so we have a number of people that are doing similar work to what Juan is, but I flagged him because his work in Skagit was truly exceptional and really helped us take that group to a pretty remarkable place.
Yeah, go ahead, Jessica. Jessica, I see you came off mute, but your audio's not coming through. I'm not sure if you're trying to. Okay. We're not hearing your audio come through, unfortunately. If you want to try and write it out. Yeah, that sounds good.
Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah. So what we'll do, Jessica, as Jessica's writing that out, and I see Virginia here as well. So what we'll do here is we'll sort of bring this to a close as sort of like from a formal standpoint from this conversation. But I think I really want to encourage EAG members and PSC members, especially in the relationship of the bigger picture of this work, to consider how these principles and these values and this approach can be something that we, and I won't even necessarily say replicate, because there's here, we don't need to sort of start it over again and again, but rather think about, okay, how do we better embody some of these in the practices of how we are going to do things? So what we'll do here is we'll do a short pause here, a short break. And Jessica, please add what you were going to say aloud into the chat. We'll come back at 6:10. I'll pass it over to Teresa and co to talk language access plan. And yeah, really encourage to sort of center that in a place that we can continue this conversation, but in the very specific application of the language access plan. So yeah, we'll come back at 6:10, folks, and dive into that. Appreciate you all. Thanks, Ray and Virginia and Will.
Thank
and
you all.
others. Yeah. Okay. We'll start to come back again, everyone. Thank you. Ariam and I were just like remarking, we're both in the office. If that wasn't obvious from our simul backdrops, but these monthly meetings have been a really good marker of like what time of the year it is. And it's just like, we're getting into summer. It's 6 p.m. We're on a break. Time this meeting is done, it's still going to be light out. Wild. Okay. So if that is a motivation, I don't know what is. So we're going to transition here. And again, for folks, if you're watching on the live stream, we'll be opening up public comment period just at the tail end of the meeting. And so please communicate at that point in time. Oh yeah, go ahead, C.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you want to finish? I can speak after you're done.
Oh, I was just gonna just basically the instructions if you're on the live stream about public comment are on the screen right now, and we'll repeat them again sort of 5 minutes out. But yeah, you can go ahead, see.
I just want to verbalize a comment that I made in chat because it's like a reply to what Virginia had said, and I'm not sure if people are seeing it just because it may be hidden. But this is a little bit like I'm really glad that this is successful. And I'm glad that PSE is hearing our feedback and trying to sort of like maintain these relationships. And like it is like a lot of work and energy, but I think it's, good that we don't sort of like make it a kind of transactional or extractive process. And I want to echo something that Monica said earlier around slide 20 in terms of like the wording on the second block, which is like honoring relationship as strategy. I also kind of felt that was pretty corporate and transactional, and I feel pretty uncomfortable with that. It just feels kind of extractive, even in sort of like underlying kind of mindset. So I really support Monica's feedback on that. And then kind of along what Amy was saying, like I'm glad that PSE is improving and learning from communities, but I feel like really foundational to building relationships is like educating when different groups have contributed to that learning process. And like while I was really happy that Virginia said that she took like like that whole group had taken a lot of lessons learned from the equity forums that we've organized over the last 2 years in terms of like providing childcare so parents can be there on weekends or late nights and having like real meals and having alternative transportation. I'm wondering if that was ever acknowledged that this came out of learning experiences with EAG and the equity forums when you guys interacted with the empowerment groups. And yeah, I just kind of wish that was acknowledged during the presentation instead of like an afterthought, because I don't want to say like we need to be congratulated as a group. Like I'm glad that PSE is taking the discussions and applying it to other communities, but I think just being more transparent about that learning process and people who have contributed to it would go a long ways to kind of building the relationships that PAC acknowledges that it wants to build. So yeah, that's my comment along those lines.
Yeah, thanks, C. Very, very fair points. So it's a reflection on the guiding principles, echoing Monica's piece around, feeling that alignment with the, relationship building as a core piece, but seeing it come off a little bit transactional when articulated back as this sort of like relationship as strategy. And then the second piece, which I think totally is this big question, and sort of, EAG members have talked about this sort of terminology of feedback loop before. And that was kind of a little bit of something that I was trying to riff off of when Dennis was talking about, there's like the longevity and feedback loop sort of between parties, for lack of a better word. But then there's this like this broader extension of those loops extending throughout the utility, but then also throughout, this space or other spaces where it's both about the like relationship that's being formed here between I and you in any particular space, but also the recognition of, I come to this with all of this foundation and background from all of these people. We help make those connections, and then, that circle becomes a lot bigger. So yeah, so I appreciate you saying that, C, and I think you're totally pointing out some of the important things around the like practice of relationship building, and reciprocity is part of that too. So again, as we go into this language access conversation for Teresa and Yvonne, again, not to put y'all on the spot, but thinking as you go through, I know we have some conversation here around sort of language access best practices around, where have some of those learnings come, if there's things that y'all have to share, and, I don't think there needs to be an expectation that all the work that PSC is doing is going to be in the same exact way as the empowerment pilot, but thinking about where there's lessons from there is something that all of us can sort of hope. We can have an open dialogue about that here as we get to it. So I will turn over to Teresa and Yvonne and toggle your slides here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right.
Yes.
We will do our best to be cognizant of time here. So I'm Teresa Birch. You saw me last month. Thank you for having me back. We're going to tag team Yvonne and I a little bit. So I'm going to start us off here. So we are kind of still in the relatively early stages of developing a language access plan and still learning. And so, as Ishmael said, there's probably a lot that we can learn and glean from some of these other programs that have been going on and are getting good feedback as well. So we do want our EAG members to see what we're doing, understand it, our approach, our timeline, and then really most importantly, feedback based on your experiences, your unique experiences in the community and lived experiences. So with that, let me go to the next slide. And so here's some data from just from our, we have a lot of third-party data that we work with. So about 131,000 or 8.5% of our residential customers don't speak English as their primary language. Spanish, Mandarin, Russian, Vietnamese, Korean, or Hindi tend to float to the top with what we see. And of those 131,000, about 52,000 fall into our estimated low income guidelines. And keep in mind, again, that's third party data, but it does show us that, so there's a range of accuracy, right? But it does show us that a good percentage of those customers do seem to be, would fall within our income qualified programs. So I'm going to quick hand it to Yvonne for the next slide because she's going to talk to you a little bit about some maps we put together.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. So we received input from many of you from the May steering committee meeting and wanting to understand where our customers are with limited English proficiency may be located in our service territory. So this captures kind of geographically where they might be located and highlights kind of three factors here. So on the left, you see the limited English ability. So the darker the color, the higher the percentage of customers who have limited English ability. In the middle there is language diversity. And so the darker the pink, the higher the number of languages we see spoken in that area. And then finally on the right is the level of income. So the darker the color there, the higher the percentage of customers we see that fall below the 80% area median income. So this information really helps us to understand where the customer language needs may be and helps us to provide input when we develop, right, the language access plan and help us understand where we may need additional language supports, for instance, in our outreach efforts. So we'll go to the next slide. All right. And I'll pass it over to Teresa for this one.
Back to me for this one.
Yes.
Yep, this will be my last slide. And then Yvonne's going to expand on a couple of things, particularly related to the plan itself and why we're here talking about it. But we wanted to highlight, before we get into that, what we currently provide. This is by no means us saying we already do enough. We know that, right? So we're just here to say, here's what we're doing. And then we need to figure out, is this enough or not? And where are there gaps and what are we missing, which is all going to be part of as we're going through our needs assessment. So PSC.com, just in the last couple of years, we've added translation in English plus 6 languages. And for those who don't know what those are, they're Spanish, Chinese, Russian, Vietnamese, Korean, and Hindi. Last summer, for the first time, we went live with a customer preference to select their language of preference so that we could have it to be able to use it for specific things. Like, for example, we're working on being able to send urgent and final notices when customers are in an arrearage situation. in Spanish if they've chosen that language. And that does tend to be our number one need for translation. Our call center, our IVR, is in English and Spanish. We have interpretation services that folks can call in for that. It's a third party, offers over 140 languages. And our energy advisors who also take calls have in-house, we have Spanish, Hindi, and Cantonese speakers that can take those calls. We're very proud that our bill assistance program now has paper and online applications in Spanish, which we had before. We had paper before in Spanish. We did not have online. And we already have efforts underway to improve that as well. That one's very important, considering the 52 or 51,000 customers I just referred to. Our customer outreach team has done a great job of adding translation services to their workshops and events, Spanish, Vietnamese speaking staff on the team. And then, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to attend, I think I'm at 3 of these events now. Community-based organization members will show up to add interpretation services in other language, and that's just been wonderful. And then in our renewable space, our marketing for programs like community solar and electric vehicles is in English and Spanish. And our partnership with APCC has community solar opportunities in education in Vietnamese, which, as you heard, is one of our top languages as well. So we wanted to start by grounding ourselves in what we were doing so that we could move on to see what do we need to add and where do we need to add it. And so with that, I will give it back to Yvonne to tell us a little more about where this came from and what we're doing.
All right, thanks, Teresa. So, so I wanted to highlight kind of the compliance requirement that came out of our recent general rate case order. You know, Teresa mentioned a lot of the work that we're doing around language accessibility already, but really, I think, you know, this requirement that came out of the general rate case this past January really helps to kind of formalize what we're doing into a plan. And so you'll see here is the compliance requirement that came out of it is to develop a formal language access plan. And we're really committed to working with the EHE, also our Low Income Advisory Committee, to devise a timeline, as well as kind of reviewing our approach and timeline, which we're here to do today. And when we say language access plan, right, it's just that it's a plan for how we continue to mature the work that we're doing around language accessibility. And also it just aligns with, you know, this work aligns with the feedback that we received from the DR empowerment pilot groups, right, that Ray had mentioned about wanting things to be more accessible in language. So it's really great to see that alignment there. So you'll see that we're this year looking to formalize the work here. All right, next slide. So this slide kind of describes how we're approaching the development of the language access plan and the timeline around this. So we're currently conducting a needs assessment where we've identified key players to be interviewed to gather their feedback into this language access plan and understand their needs, challenges, and potential solutions. It includes a combination of internal and external groups that we're interviewing. And for external, we're meeting with advisory groups like the EAG and our LIAC, and also looking at interviewing one of our DR empowerment groups too for input into the needs assessment. So, so you'll see some of that in this timeline. Ultimately, we're looking to publish this language access plan by the end of this year. And from there, we will have developed action plans and a roadmap from that to then take that and implement it into the future years and continue to evaluate and improve upon it. And so you'll see at the bottom half here kind of what our current scope looks like. You know, we know we have a lot of touch points with customers and we can't tackle everything. So this is our first round. You'll see kind of our areas here are the psc.com website, our mobile app, call center, and our IVR, billing and payments, bill payment programs such as energy assistance programs, our customer communications during disconnections outreach, storm response, unplanned outage communications, and also public safety power shutoff too. And this is fairly new, which started last year. And that's where we're monitoring for higher wildfire risk. And when we see a potential higher risk for wildfire in a particular area, we would be proactively notifying customers in advance for a power shutoff to prevent wildfire. We thought that because of the nature of this, it was an important piece of communication that this should be part of this initial scope. And then program enrollment processes, and then finally, small to medium business size customer interactions. And oftentimes they may not get the needed attention, so making sure that when we interact with them, it's clear and understandable to them. All right, so next is some of the current best practices and gaps that we've put together to date here. And, I want to acknowledge the EAG's really ongoing interest in this and raising this issue also in previous meetings to us. Particularly, Carrie, you've been an advocate on language accessibility and when we've presented topics around outreach efforts. So really want to recognize that. And so based on the input from the EAG so far, and also our needs assessment that we've done, these are some of the best practices. They're not comprehensive, just wanted to highlight a few here, where we've heard many times from the EAG about using plain and simple language writing. So at the 6th grade level, avoiding jargon, defining special terms and giving examples to when we use that term, and including graphics. And so the next few also are more related to the plan itself and some internal practices, like designating language plan lead, so that lead will look across the company in this area, doing a needs assessment, which I talked about, ensuring that staff is trained on the plan so they are aware of, know what our internal procedures are for providing language assistance services, and evaluating the plan's effectiveness. What are our metrics for success in our plan to monitor our efforts going forward? And then also gaps we're seeing. And so we see inconsistencies in language support across programs and services. Like, for instance, while our website is in 7 languages, we don't offer all documents in 7 languages. And being able to serve customers across various channels so they're supported throughout the customer journey. So when we serve them in person through our events or workshops, they may need support in other channels like our call center. So making sure that there's a smooth process in other channels as well. Also inconsistent or incorrect language translation. Perhaps sometimes website languages that are translated versus transcreated may be incorrect. And then collateral in limited languages, understanding that, we don't have them in many of the other languages, just maybe the top 1 or 2. All right, so I see a lot of.
Yeah, I saw maybe what we'll do is, Yvonne, why don't you prompt, because I know that the conversation that you want to ask kind of reflects back to this slide. So why don't you prompt this? I'll go back 1 slide, and then I want to see, I know Amy had a hand up, Monica had some things in the chat, Glenda. So, okay, but we'll go and see if we can get those things together. So why don't you prompt these questions and then we'll come back.
Yeah, so based on what I said around best practices and gaps, really wanted to circle this back with the EAG here and ask all of you, what are some additional best practices you've seen that we should consider to increase language accessibility for our customers? And then where do you see any gaps or concerns? Just wanted to open that up.
So I'm going to come back a slide. So, and then I'll add this into the chat as well. So additional best practices you should see to consider, and then biggest gaps or concerns. So essentially we've got the equivalent of this mirrored here. And so I'm looking here. I see, let's go, Kari, let's go to your hand up first. And then I see if either Monica, Glenda, Amy C, really anyone, of course, but folks that have added things in the chat, if you want to jump in and add to this. But Kari, why don't you go first, and then we'll loop folks in.
I think use infographic with picture is important because picture by itself is a universal language. So, and try to minimize the word as many as possible and use neutral word, because sometimes when we do translation, we do see that there are words that is hard to translate. For example, we help to translate or review translation about work schedule, work hour. And I remember there's a term saying like on the clock and off the clock. I mean, it's perfectly fine in English. But when it comes to translation, do we just translate the word by word meaning, or do we translate the actual meaning? But what if there is not a perfect word for that particular terms? So it is really important before everything finalized to reach out to the targeted community, or find someone who is from the community to be able to cross-check to make sure that to avoid those terminologies that it's not translatable. And then oftentimes for translator, because for people who do professional translation, they must have a pretty good literacy skill. So for the terms and terminologies that they use, it might be higher level. It's not layman enough for people to understand. So in other words, it's really important to make sure that we are not, trying to create technical education material or whatsoever for people who are highly educated. We are trying to make the information easy to understand for people who might not have a lot of education. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thanks, Karia. I'm curious here, PSE, Teresa, anything y'all want to say? There's a bunch of things coming through, but just curious, and then we'll go to TJ. Well, actually, before we go to TJ, I'll acknowledge something from the chat. Yeah.
Very quick, because I know I'm trying to be aware of time, but on that, I just want you to know that we hear that. And that's something we're definitely embracing. And I have a couple stories, but just very quickly, when we introduced our bill forgiveness program for customers that have gotten past due last fall, it was industry-wide called an arrearage management program. And we learned very quickly that arrearage, that is not a good term. It doesn't translate well. People don't know what it means. It's very confusing. And we actually polled our customers and they said, just call it past due. It's past due. And so I learned a lot from that. And I intend to continue that going forward, is like asking what works better in this scenario. Just like you just said, is it work hours or is it on the clock? So totally embracing that. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I'll acknowledge, I think a couple of things I'm seeing in the chat from Monica are very similar around the use of terms. They might not be as well developed, and translating can be difficult, whether, it's not a guarantee that someone else is going to interpret it in the same way. And so I think Karia's point of and thank you, TJ, IEP is for individualized education plan, typically for students with disabilities. Yeah. Amy.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask who at Puget Sound Energy is going to get the plain writing trainings, because I do think it's helpful for all staff, and I do think it is even helpful, in this. I come from a background at the Department of Ecology where everyone was required to take a plain language training. And then each section had access champions. So people who were helping make sure their section had an expert to help them. What? Oh, sorry. And I just think that is a good set of practices, is to have everyone at PSE learn. Like I don't like, I just want to give like an example, is instead of use plain language writing, you could just say plain, like use plain writing, define terms, have a plan lead, have a needs question, train staff. Like I think it's, I'm trying to make this presentation a little bit more plain language as well. And I just think it's something that has helped me a lot professionally. And I think the community benefits when everyone kind of knows more. I know I did. So I just want to offer that as something that could be really cool to have like PSE folks trained on as well.
So Amy, I wanted to just come on just to address that point, to let you know that some of the biggest pressure we're getting on this language access work is from internal PSC employees at all levels who believe that a lot of our conversation, our communication, especially in the regulatory space, is too complicated and difficult to engage with. And so there's a large push, including from a number of our executives, to say this should be more accessible. So I just want to make sure you know that we're getting a lot of pressure on this for that aspect of the plan.
So it sounds like it's on the way, but I just want to endorse that like side of the of the conversation. Thank you, Troy.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. No, it's a good, even the way that you were just acknowledging in like this presentation, just like the practice in a regular piece of like the getting into those habits. So okay, this is good. This is really good. So I think well, Yvonne, you can talk about sort of what's next. I was going to make an assumption of how this connects to what's next, but maybe you can talk a little bit, Yvonne, as you sort of hear everyone's response. And you talked a little bit about the plan. I'm not sure if you have here, what can the EAG expect next to learn or hear about the language access plan in the future?
Yeah, so I thank you, Ishmael. I think, in terms of next steps, thank you so much for all of your input and feedback. And we welcome also any additional feedback and input that you might have too, as we start to develop this language access plan. And we'll come back to the EAG's time, hopefully in the near future. I know the calendar gets pretty full. It's getting full for the rest of the year. We're really going to be hoping to share out what the action plan or roadmap will look like for this language access plan.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I see Glenda acknowledging trusted messengers, which is actually something we should probably talk about more broadly, as well as, again, thinking back to like the empowerment pilot, where you can start to have the connections between sort of the familiarity of a relationship to help support across that trust in communicating. Because again, it's more than just the words used, et cetera. It's also the like, willingness to internalize and trust what someone is telling you as true or otherwise. So appreciate that, Glenda, with that. Okay. To close in our big meeting around sort of engagement and opportunities, Mackenzie is here to talk a little bit about the solar grant. And so Mackenzie, I will not belabor it and pass over to you to help get us up to speed.
Perfect, thanks. If you could go to the next slide. So ultimately, the solar grants are an annual process, and some of you have heard me speak about them a number of times in past years, but I did want to talk really quickly, I know we're short on time, about overall eligibility, process, and impact of the grants. And then this is an extremely collaborative program because each year we have EAG members participate in the process and help us decide which projects get funded. So I'll ask those folks if they'd like to share about their time on the 2024 panel. And then I can make my ask of you all, which is who might want to review for the 2025 round and how you might share this opportunity with eligible applicants in your community. So next slide. What are these grants and who are they for? This year, we have $750,000 to distribute to community-based organizations, government agencies, and tribal entities serving historically marginalized communities to install solar that they own on their property. And applicants can request up to 100% or $100,000 per project. And I'll skip over some of the technical requirements on the right, but I think what's most important is we're asking applicants to show us how they will use the savings on their electric bill from the solar to serve their communities. We also put a priority on applicants that serve communities with deepest need, like food banks. We also prioritize applicants who have not received solar grant funding from PSE in the past and offer extra credit for projects with a workforce development component. Next slide. So I'll run through the overarching process we use to administer these grants, focusing both on the applicant experience and how EAG members have influenced change. So we really strive to be iterative. Starting on the left, in the first part of the year, we work with anyone who was involved in the process to hear what we can start, stop, and continue doing to improve the grants. Then we take all those process improvement suggestions and weave them into the work plan ahead of the launch. To get the word out about the grants, we work with our community teams, our recommended installers, and some community members like yourself. There is a webinar coming up this Wednesday for interested applicants, and we already have about 40 registrations. So we're really excited about that. And then obviously during the application period, customers can submit questions to me. And I try really hard to turn them around in 24 hours, depending on the complexity of the question. At the urging of EAG members, this is our second year offering free bid procurement and grant writing assistance via our partner Spark Northwest. And Spark can take interested applicants up until July 31st and intends to meet them where they are by using a spectrum of services based on the applicant's resourcing and past experience with solar. So they can essentially be someone that follows them along and helps them in the entire process, including, reaching out to installers, asking for a bid, or all the way to writing the grant itself. So once applications close in August, we start the review process, and a partner of PSE begins by reaching out to all applicants to schedule an interview with them. We don't want to judge an application solely what's on the paper, especially if materials were confusing or the organization was short on time or resources. So there's always that opportunity to talk it through with us. Finally, all review panel members, which is a mix of EAG and PSE staff, get together and score projects. Our really technical feasibility is considered pass-fail. As long as the project is technically viable, we focus primarily on the community impact of the project, the organization's commitment to equitable and inclusive access, and the unique education outreach tactics they may employ to educate their communities about solar. And we aim to wrap that up by year end so awardees can get under contract with their chosen installer and begin construction of the project the following year. Next slide, please. So we know that applying for grants and embarking on a large-scale solar installation is no small feat, so we've been looking for ways to make the process more accessible. This is not an exhaustive list, but a few pieces I wanted to call out. Every year, we see ways to shorten the application. I think this year alone, we struck over 10 questions. So it's good to get it down to what we actually need to assess the projects themselves. We've also completely reorganized the application to be very clear what parts the installer should help the applicant fill out. So what's the technical pieces of the project versus what parts an applicant can fill out themselves about their own organization's impact. We're also giving folks the opportunity to use video or audio format to narrate their impact to us as opposed to writing out new content. I talked about the free grant writing and bid procurement assistance that Spark provides. I also talked a little bit about the prioritization of new applicants who have never gotten solar grant funding from us in the past. I think that's really helped us hone our outreach strategies to connect with smaller organizations with less resources. Another new thing this year, we often hear from applicants, I really want to do a community education on solar, but I just don't know where to start. So for the first time ever, we're partnering with Spark Northwest to offer a sort of turnkey, but also co-created community solar education session. So folks can just go straight to them. It's covered by the grant funding and their community can learn about solar. After notifications are sent, we also do a debrief meeting with unsuccessful applicants to help increase transparency in the decision-making process and get them connected with other PSC programs that might be a good fit. And as a suggestion from the EAG members, this will be our second year offering a paid survey to all the applicants as well, so we can really include them in that start, stop, continue discussion. And I also want to take a moment to call out, especially coming after the language accessibility presentation, that in-language materials is a big gap for this program. So that's something we plan to address in the coming round. Next slide. Okay, so you can read about the financial impacts on the slide here, and everyone who was awarded in the past is at psc.com/solar grant. I can put that in the chat so you can see who was awarded. But I think, a review panel favorite and an applicant that took advantage of the opportunity to provide some narrative responses to their application via video was Burlington Lutheran Church. They created it in partnership with the Upper Skagit tribe. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat. I'm not sure it's a full 5 minutes, so I don't know if we have time to watch it right now, but I hope everyone will watch it on their own. I found it incredibly powerful, how they told their story and how they partnered with their community to have their community actually say what impact the church had on their lives. Next slide. Okay. So now I want to take some space for C, TJ, and Elizabeth if they would like to share their experience on the solar grant review panel. So to give you some insight into the lift required to be on the review panel, we will likely schedule orientation meetings in August or September. And all the meetings usually conclude in December, although we may slip into January if that's when it's best to hold sort of the debrief process improvement meetings. On average, I think it takes about 20 hours of time over those 5 to 6 months, if I'm doing my math correct. Really concentrated in the October-November timeframe, though, I will say. And we are providing stipends at the rate of $50 per hour. And I also want to note that meetings will typically be in the evening, so similar to the EAG meetings, either 4 to 6 or 5 to 7 has been what we are doing. So if you'd like to participate in the review panel, you can drop your name in the chat now, or if you need to think it over, I think just email Yvonne by July 9th. I also want to say this is not binding. So if you say yes today and then decide it's not a great fit, you can tell us that that's not a firm commitment. I'll check back in closer to. And the last thing is, since you are all so active in your communities, if you know of any eligible applicants, we'd love it if you could please spread the word. So after this meeting, I will provide the coordinators with materials for you to help distribute, including like an email template, FAQ, etc. And thank you.
got a couple of minutes. Does anybody have any other questions, maybe clarifying questions? I see a couple people in the chat who've been a part of it. TJ, who is really encouraging other people to join, which is very nice of you, TJ, but also yeah, me giving an opportunity. So if you're thinking about it, is there any other questions you may have, clarifying questions for Mackenzie? Okay. I went once in my head. I went twice.
What
Oh,
is
Amy, third
the
time. Great.
what is the size of like a project that's eligible? I think you had it on the last page, but one of the last pages.
It's relatively unusual unless you have a massive multifamily building or a huge community center that we see too many projects over 100 kilowatts. So it seems to encompass a good sample.
So what is the smallest organization you've worked with in terms of number of people in the organization, and the largest organization you've worked with?
I will have to get back to you. Let me dig into all the applications and figure that out.
All right, just was trying to get an idea of scale.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I can give you an example. So last year there was or this past year, Skagit, there's Saving Pets One at a Time, which is like a very small organization that helps work with unhoused people who are trying to retain care for their pets and their companions. And so I don't know their exact size, but I remember them being very, very small. And then I think, in terms of bigger, we have worked with some of the tribes like the Nisqually, who I know, we coordinate with many, many folks over there. So there's some examples, but I'm happy to actually find some data-driven points for you.
Cool. Cool. Okay. Well, I see Mackenzie, a couple people, folks that have been engaged with it, TJ and C, and also seeing Jenny and Megan, all sort of indicating their interests, want to make space for others. And so, yeah, I think I'm going to stop sharing actually, sending materials to be able to share around. Amy asked how many members of the EAG can join. That's actually a good question before we wrap. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have a limit. So what we typically do is we take the number of EAG members we get, and then we try to match it with PSE staff, or we could even have less PSE staff than EAG members, but I don't want to stop anyone from volunteering.
And I just want to add on, Mackenzie, we've decided to allocate always like a certain percentage for tribal projects, right? Is it like 50%?
Yeah, last year we said 40%, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. And I will say tribes tend to be exempt from that past applicant piece. I think in the review, not exempt, but like it tends to, I think, be less important than their overall community impact. So if we get a tribal project, we do typically fund it.
Cool. So it looks like, we'll try and help coordinating. Looks like you got some folks who are interested in being alternates. Monica is a tentative yes, which again, you don't have to commit in this moment. Amy, you're going to get some more info in July, and then loop back. And I'm sure through Yvonne and Troy and co, we can help coordinate. Mackenzie's been involved with you all for some time. So excellent. That's what we had. That's our meeting. Appreciate everyone for all the energy and contribution, and I'm excited to continue to build on these learnings and echo, as it was said earlier in the meeting, the places where there's sort of this internal pushback or these we're trying to still figure this out, how we can continue to advance those things, and credit to you all where you're part of that. So enjoy the rest of your Monday evenings. there is still light and sun. Again, this is like the best part right now of doing these. Is just like the reminder that we're in spring and getting to summer. So take care, everyone. Be well. See you next